It was in the early hours of Sunday, the 21st of September 1952, when a taxi pulled up outside South Bank Police Station, Middlesbrough, in the northeast of England. Sergeant William Ellis had been having a relatively quiet night manning the front desk when two young men walked through the door. Taxi driver William Flower addressed the officer. "There's a man outside in my cab who says he stabbed someone." Sergeant Ellis left the station and spoke to the person in the cab, asking if it was true. "I have stabbed a man, and that is that. He pinched my girl." He burst into tears as Sergeant Ellis cautioned him and took him inside the station to make a full statement. The man said his name was Herbert Appleby and that he lived at 96 Lang Street, Grangetown, with his mother, father and brother, and he had committed the murder during a party at a house on nearby Lee Road. Appleby was placed in an interview room while Sergeant Ellis checked out his story. He soon learned that it was indeed true and a man had been found dead on arrival at St Luke's Hospital in the last hour. Appleby was then interviewed by Inspector Doherty of Middlesbrough CID, where the events of the tragedy were explained. Appleby told them that on the previous afternoon he had been a groomsman at a wedding of a friend, Clifford Wall, a naval steward, and his South African bride, Catherine Prinsloo. The tragedy had taken place after the happy couple had departed for their honeymoon at Whitby, and after closing time at a local pub, the guests had returned to the home of another guest to finish off the night with a party. 20-year-old Appleby, former soldier who had spent 2 years national service in the Middle East, worked as a sling loader at the local docks and had attended the party with his girlfriend, 20-year-old Lillian Dolly Robbins. They had had a quarrel earlier when she saw him dancing with another girl, and she left him talking to some workmates in the kitchen as she went back into the front room. Having spent the night downing pints of bitter, Appleby was now drunk, and finishing his drink he went in search of Dolly, finding her sitting on the sofa with 29-year-old John David Thomas, a fitter at the shipyard and stepbrother of the bridegroom. Thomas appeared to have his arm around her. It may well have been an innocent action. Dolly and David were old friends, and the wedding had been the first time they had seen each other for over 2 years. But Appleby immediately jumped to the conclusion Dolly had ditched him, taken up with Thomas, and without explanation he stormed from the room and walked the 200 yards to his home. In a rage he picked up a carving knife and headed back to the party. Thomas was still sat next to Dolly when Appleby returned. He walked up to him and with a knife in his hand he just said, "I brought this for you," and stabbed him once in the chest. As blood oozed from the wound, Thomas slumped to the ground and Appleby ran outside. He was joined by a workmate to whom he said, "You'd better fetch the police." They flagged down a taxi cab, with Appleby telling the driver as they approached the station, "He is dead and I shall hang." They were to be prophetic words. Appleby stood trial before Mr Justice Casals at Leeds Assizes at the beginning of December. His defence was to be that he was insane at the time of the murder. Despite confessing to the police almost at once, he entered a plea of not guilty. Being forewarned that the defence was to be insanity, Mr H.R.B. Shepherd QC, leading for the prosecution, called medical witnesses to refute these claims. Dr Roper, the medical officer at Wakefield Prison, who had examined Appleby on a number of occasions since his arrest, said that, in his opinion, the prisoner's appreciation of reality at the time of the attack was not so clouded that he didn't know what he was doing was wrong. He did agree that if the prisoner had not been drinking, he may not have committed the murder, but that was not the issue. Dr Pickering, the medical officer at Durham Prison, who had also examined Appleby before the trial, said he agreed with the evidence of Dr Roper and that, in his opinion, the crime was drink-related and not a case of insanity. Mr Raymond Hinchcliffe KC led for the defence, and he had engaged the services of Dr T. M. Cuthbert, the physician superintendent at St Luke's Hospital, Middlesbrough. Dr Cuthbert told the court that, in his opinion, Herbert Appleby was suffering from what he termed clouded consciousness, and that he was mentally diseased at the time of the murder. "Here you are trying a quiet and well-mannered youth for an appalling crime of violence," Mr Hinchcliffe told the jury, "the sort of crime you may think is entirely contrary to the known personality of the prisoner." Evidence of complications Appleby's mother had experienced during his birth were told to the court by Dr Cuthbert, who claimed that the prisoner had suffered a form of brain damage and this had left him with a squint. He was also prone to sleepwalking and forms of nocturnal epilepsy. Dr Cuthbert said that the accused was somewhat immature, suffered from bouts of moodiness, and that there was evidence of mental instability in the prisoner, which he may have inherited from his mother, who had made a number of suicide attempts many years earlier. Tests carried out on a number of Appleby's relatives showed a marked tendency towards insanity on members of his mother's side of the family. The defence tried to show that the effects of alcohol on Appleby had a different effect than that on other men, and that a combination of lack of sleep prior to the wedding, combined with having little food during the day and an unusually large amount of drink, would have a bearing on Appleby's mind. Asked by Mr. Hinchliffe if this combination would render the prisoner capable of appreciating his actions, Dr. Cuthbert said, "I doubt it." Asked under cross-examination by Mr. Shepherd what disease the prisoner was suffering from, Dr. Cuthbert conceded that it would be misleading to try to put it under a label that didn't necessarily fit. After all, a label only gives an outline and doesn't give details. His condition was that of a paranoid state. This was the condition he was in when he had the knife, Dr. Cuthbert continued. When asked when the state of paranoia began, Dr. Cuthbert said probably at the visit to the last public house before closing time. He added that when Appleby returned with the knife, he had no idea what he was doing due to the clouded consciousness. Sensing the upper hand, the Crown moved in for the kill. Mr. Shepherd asked, would he be sufficiently conscious to realise that his girlfriend was carrying on with another man? That would have been on his mind all evening, Dr. Cuthbert replied, somewhat unconvincingly. Mr. Justice Cassells asked Hinchcliffe to clarify a statement he made when he said he believed that Appleby may have stabbed himself when he picked up the knife. You say that when he picked up the knife he did not know what he was doing, he asked the defence. Yes, he did not know he was killing a man, it was an automatic reaction. Dr. Roper was called back to the stand and said that while he agreed with much of what Dr. Cuthbert said, he could not take the view that Appleby was insane at the time of the killing. This was a key point in the case. He agreed that Appleby was building up to an emotional explosion, but the difference in his argument was that he offered the opinion that the prisoner knew what he was doing and that it was wrong. The jury of 11 men and 1 woman evidently agreed with this line of thought, for when the trial concluded, they were asked to consider a verdict and they found the prisoner guilty of wilful murder. Mr. Justice Cassells donned the black cap and sentenced Appleby to death. A petition was immediately launched by Appleby's father, and among the first to sign was his girlfriend Dolly Robbins. Petition forms were handed out throughout Teesside and averaged 1,000 signatures a day, asking for the Home Secretary to advise a reprieve. There was no appeal against the conviction, all hopes being pinned on the sentence being commuted. The execution was fixed for Christmas Eve 1952 at Durham Prison, and letters were sent out to Hangman Steve Wade and Assistant Harry Allen asking for their services. Efforts to stall the execution failed, and Appleby kept a brave face in the death cell. As the fateful hour struck and the hangman entered the cell and strapped his arms, Appleby managed to sum up the last reserves of courage to thank the prison staff for their kindness, and David Thomas was avenged. Although December was one of the busiest months for the hangman, there were only 2 executions carried out on Christmas Eve in the 20th century. And by sheer coincidence, both men were executed for crimes committed in the Middlesbrough area. In 1940, Edward Scollon was hanged for the murder of his wife, having committed his crime just a few short miles from where Herbert Appleby stabbed John Thomas. Both men would pay for their lives on the scaffold of Durham Jail. My name is Steve Fielding. Thank you for watching and listening to another episode of Tales from the Hangman's Record. If you have enjoyed the video, please press the like button, and can you also share and subscribe to my channel if you don't already do so. Check out my website, thehangmansrecord.com, for information on my books and to find links to the other videos in the series, and to order copies of the 3-volume Hangman's Record books at a special discounted price. Please use the comments below for thoughts on this case and for suggestions for other cases to feature in this series.